Hey, welcome to my couch again.
You have a lovely couch.
Right, well, that's why it's the perfect place to meet and talk some classics. The Grapes of Wrath is a book of many tragedies, including the tragedy of its poor quality. The book is dense, profoundly unenjoyable, and littered with conversations in barely intelligible accent.
I absolutely hated it. I don't think it deserves a status of a classic.
No,
I
why
think
not?
I think this book is like a Twitter post that grew in size and mutated into a coherent plot. But in reality, this is just a leftist screaming at you about their politics. How does a bad book get on the list of the great? And what is greatness? And is it the same as being admitted on the list? The Grapes of Wrath earned its author a Nobel Prize and a place in American high school curriculum, while at the same time both critics and popular opinions of the books are not that different from our own evaluation. This isn't a typical scenario where critics praise the work while the general public fails to understand it, nor the other way around. This is a much more interesting case when a bad book is a classic that is remembered and read just because it made it on the list of the great.
On one thing we agree, I also did not like the book. I hate the book very much. I think it does a lot of harm. It still should be read, though, and I do think it's a classic. So perhaps we have to get to the bottom of what makes a classic. In your essay, you wrote the first question you had was, how does a bad book get on the list of the great books, right? Which says that you think it is on the list of great books, and the fact that we have picked it up for the Couch Cool Classics, classifies it as classic. So you can't tell me that it's not a classic.
Yes, of course it is a classic. Well, we're going through the book 1000 books you need to read before you die, right?
No. It's 1,000 to die enlightened. We are cooler than that.
Oh, of course.
And we
Yes.
seek higher goals.
Well, supposedly this book is a step towards enlightenment, and I'm not sure how enlightened it got me. Perhaps it would help me to work on my anger issues in a weird way.
Right, you're trying not to throw the book against the wall?
Well, because my phone costs money, so I would not do that.
If it were paper, it would be flying.
Yeah, that's maybe it's a big reason why I don't read paper.
Right.
But yes, I think the reason I'm not satisfied with the fact that it's on the list of the great books and we spend our time reading it is because it doesn't really rhyme with how I understand a great book and how a book functions as a step towards enlightenment. Because I think that when you read a book, you're supposed to experience a life of a person that's fundamentally different from you. And in that difference, you find those similarities that you have that are universal for people, or something you can relate to, or some compassion you can find for people. And here, the people are so obviously just gears that Steinbeck needs to put forward his politics. There's no thinking you're doing for yourself. All you're doing is just reading what Steinbeck wrote for you. And it annoys me. Did it annoy you?
I don't think that is the case. Well, first of all, who says that you do have to find some universals in it? Eventually, perhaps it's about discovering that everybody's different. Maybe somebody else's experience is completely different. I don't know that I need that relatability in there. I mean, in another podcast, we read about colorful blobs flying around, and I do not identify with their sexual dynamics. So I don't need to identify with the Jode family either. But I do think that that it was not that flat. I mean, the writing wasn't good. He spent a lot of time talking about the same things over and over and over. It could have been half the size. But the characters do seem to have quite the personality. They seem to have motivations, and they seem to be pressed by stuff that happens in their life. They seem to respond quite rationally to those. So I don't see where this flatness of characters comes from to you.
I wouldn't necessarily say that it's flatness, but it's just the utilitarianism of it. It doesn't feel like any of the characters contradict what the book is saying. It doesn't have this complexity that you would find in a really great book. It's not ambiguous. It's not changing shape based on your perspective. Like, if you read Grapes of Wrath at the age of 15 and the age of 60, you'd see the exact same thing. Because this book is very clear in what it's trying to say. There's nothing you can misperceive based on differences in yourself.
Right. Okay. So you're saying that it's just too straightforward. That's what's going on.
Yes, I think.
But isn't that so American that things are what they are?
It is so American. It is so American.
I mean, you are trained in the Russian classics, right? Where in the high context world, where a thing means 50 different things. That's the Asian in you, by the way. That's a private joke aside. But the American culture thing is that it's very direct. Things mean what they are supposed to mean. Jokes are jokes. Actions are actions. And sometimes we can write a little deeper. Sometimes there's a little more than that. But it's hardly ever going to be some sort of a multi-dimensional character that does one thing and means 50 others.
Well, see, then it's not a great work of literature. It's a well-written pamphlet for a political party.
Just because we don't agree with the way some people in some other culture think does not make them wrong. It's part of the world literature classics.
Love how we are marginalizing Americans right now. Yes, such an exotic culture. Greatness is a social construct. Maybe, but Grapes of Wrath are not conventionally great, and the committee's decision to award the Nobel Prize was one of the most controversial ones they made. Further, I believe that we should be minimally pragmatic about our choice of words. If we say that greatness is a convention, our discussions will center around facts about the Nobel Committee, well, metaphorically, rather than the object of art itself.
I'm not surprised by the directness. I'm not surprised by the fact that the characters do what the author wrote them to do. That seems a little bit of a funny complaint, that the character does not resist the writer.
Yeah, well, I think this is important for me, that in some sense, a good piece of art is a piece of art where each part of it works towards the same idea. But in the other sense, when there is no complexity between them, when there is no interplay, when all the parts of the piece are doing the exact same thing, it's just boring. It's just plain.
Right. But if that's what the sort of essence of the culture is, it's not something we could just disregard. And I think there's an intrinsic value in that being a bit different, because if everybody writes fantastic, convoluted, interplaying characters on everything, then how can we possibly ever learn anything? Because you can take whatever you want out of it. You don't get a teachable moment.
Did you get a teachable moment out of Grapes of Wrath?
I did get a teachable moment. I think it's a book that really well illustrates what ought not to be done when you're writing books. I think in that sort of a negative definition of things, it's really great. You mentioned that it's a poster, essay as well. I think it's not a portrayal of psychology or something foreign that we can learn from, but the poster for an ideology, and I think it's quite right. I think that's very valuable in that, because where else are you going to get that? Right? Where else are you going to get to see what this ideology looks like when really put in motion, when really presented to you? Because if it's all just convoluted, complex characters, some of them may be communist, and you might not even know it, and you're just getting influenced by those hidden meanings without your direct knowledge. Here, you see what it is, and you get a framework of reference out of it. That's what I got out of it.
I have no idea what you mean by this.
Well, it's very simple. I mean, how can you define an idea if not against other ideas? And the book presents a specific set of ideas, the leftist Marxist ideas, in a very clear light. This is what it is. This is what it looks like, right? This is what people think that do and think, right? And then you can have that image in your mind when you approach something else more complex, and it shows you, by contrast, what is overlapping with that in other images.
And why do you need to read Grapes of Wrath instead of the the Manifest of the Communist Party?
Because all of those theoretical things are abstract, and they are really hard to it's very hard to jump from one world to another, right? Because obviously you know what exploitation of one class by another class means in theory. Maybe you know it in historical reality, but those are not emotional stories. Those are not emotional narratives. And emotion is something we learn through a lot. And that's something we experience in fiction. It's why we read the fiction. It's that sort of catharsis and that connection that you're looking for, right? So all of the emotion in there could really blind you sometimes, and you don't really recognize what's what immediately, and you may be influenced by things that you don't really identify so well. So I think it's valuable to have something that really puts in the emotion and the idea so clearly it can't be missed, so you know what the reference is.
So through Grapes of Wrath you understood communism better.
I like to think that I understood communism before that, but I think it gives you a better tool set or better ability to pick up on it in other books you're reading later. That is, if you're told that's what it is. Because I think a lot of people are not told that what the book is. A lot of people read the Grapes of Wrath, and nobody tells them, communism and what that was, and they go like, "Wow, poor Jodes, this is capitalist. Oh my God!" So that is what I consider the worst and the most dangerous about the book. If you read it naively, you will be indoctrinated because it's so straightforward and it's very clear. Evil capitalists oppressing these poor people, and you have direct emotional examples of how that happens. It's very plausible. Like in modern America, post 2008, banks foreclosing on houses and everything, you have this image. Because when I wrote the articles on Medium for this, I checked what other people wrote about the Grapes of Wrath, and most people were just gushing, like, "Oh, this is an amazing book. I read it twice. I read it many times, and I loved it very much." And I'm like, maybe we should consider the ideological problems here, because this is exactly what they did. They started talking about oppression from the upper classes and capitalists and all that.
This is because this is how literature is taught in America.
What's that?
This is because this is how literature is taught in America in the first place, through critical theory.
Wait, can you elaborate on that?
Well, this is the main methodology that is used in social sciences in the US right now. So yeah, when a person goes to college to study literature or like Grapes of Wrath in particular, they'll be taught to look at it through the lens of critical theory, to look at some convictions we have that undermine some power structures in our society, or how the economic reality forms how we think about social classes or something like that. So yeah, of course, this kind of rhetoric is going to be prevalent in the commentary on this.
Right. So you're basically, what you're saying is that what they do now is that they take the reality and they put it back into the fiction. They interpret the fiction through the lens of reality. Is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah, this is the Marxist approach, of course. Yes.
Right. Well, we're still Europeans, even you.
Even me.
Yeah, even you. A distant one, but. But we do it the other way around, I would say. Wouldn't you say that? Like, I think continental Europe, we look at what's in the fiction and then try to extrapolate lessons from life out of that. I mean, isn't that what we are doing with our entire project?
Yes, it has never appeared to me not to extract lessons for life out of fiction. Of course, you're reading books to understand your character and the character of people around you. Yes, of course.
Mm-hmm. Right, so you have, it seems to me that we have identified two fundamental approaches to books here, to fiction particularly. Either you can take what's real, what you see around you, and then project it back into the book and sort of explain the book to yourself through your lived experience. Or you can read the book and extrapolate what's in it into your real experience and maybe better yourself or understand the world better through that. Right, so the two competing approaches. Now, does adopting one or the other change what the classics are, the definition of the classic book?
Right. Well, this is something I talk about in my essay because I think that there are two conflicting definitions in use right now. On one hand, we do really have classics as a convention. We have this list of 1,000 books, and I mean, however
We are complicit.
yes, we are. And however you think about it, people will ask you, "Oh, I'm reading American literature. Have you read Grapes of Wrath? Have you read Of Mice and Men?" People will ask you. This continues to go on just because this book has a reputation, and it's talked about because it has a reputation. And on the other hand, I think we need to have a list of books that are just the best. Like, we have the criteria of a good book, and we take it to the extreme, we have the best. And Grapes of Wrath is a very bad book. That is a classic.
Well, now you're talking about it, it sort of appears to me that there is actually no reason to have a set of classics in the sort of view in the American sphere now, where you use the reality to interpret the fiction, because in that way the book itself is not really contributing anything, right? Because the reality matters, and we don't understand the fiction, and we use what's important to interpret this minor thing, right? It's this major to minor transfer, and the book is the minor. While if you're learning from the books, then you need the canon because you need a set of predefined qualities.
Yes, but in a Marxist approach, when you're making a book, you're not supposed to represent the reality accurately, or you can either write a book about the oppression and highlight the oppression, or you can write a book where everyone is all possible colors to balance out the oppression of the real world. Those are the only two choices you have. So I'm not sure what you mean here.
Well, I wonder what makes the classic a classic within that framework. Right? Well, how do they pick their books? I feel like it's more of a momentum, something that they had when they still thought in a more European way about this, and then they just sort of kept the list and kept going because they didn't know what to do with it, and eventually added a few things that were socially acceptable. That like you said, portrayed oppression, and now oppression is a big thing. So what books are about oppression? Oh, these ones. Oh, let's put them on the list. And now it's sort of a mix of books that are that portray the approved list of notions, approved list of issues, and then leftovers from the bygone era.
Yes, I think this is pretty much how it works.
Right.
But I don't really agree with your cynical approach to it. I think many people genuinely feel the feelings of compassion and empathy towards the oppressed here, and it's a real emotional experience to them when they're reading this.
Right, but why does that matter?
What I mean is, it matters to them.
Well, yeah, what matters to them, but who cares about them? You
just asked what great books look like to the other side.
No, I didn't ask what they look like to them. I mean, why did they pick them? Do they also go by emotion? Oh, this book feels great. Let me put it on the list.
This is what we're doing.
I don't think so. No, it's not what we are doing.
We just say words around it.
No, well, we don't pre-read the books that we read, right? Here, if you go to the other side, then what makes the European canon a canon? Then what is the European standard for a great book? Because it seems to me that you were making a case for some objectivity.
No, very much on the contrary. I think there is the books that we read in a high school curriculum that were established there by a bunch of white guys 100 years ago, and just were left there. And they're not about Nazism, great, and they're just there. And on the other hand, we also have this philosophical school of aesthetics and trying to understand what great art is, and that school has developed its own rules about what is a good book. And by those rules, we should judge which books are the best. And I think this category of the best books is very much not aligned with the category of the greatest books. Because the greatest books is a convention. But we should be talking about the best books.
Yet we are talking about the greatest books.
Yes, because we have no... Because to understand what's the best book, We need to read it, and we need to analyze it. Nobody can tell you what's the best book.
Right. Well, so that tells me that there is some sort of usefulness for the framework of great books, even though it's morally corrupt and hypocritical, and we should not read it. We need them.
What do you think it is? What's the usefulness?
The usefulness of having the great books, having the idea of great books. Well, as you said, I mean, nobody can tell you what a best book is. You can't know that it's the best book until you read it. So how are you supposed to discover it? Because if you just leave it to discover, you leave it to chance. I mean, you walk into a bookstore and it has a pretty cover, or it appeals to you, or it just happens to fly in your hand and you read it and you're like, oh, great. There are, billions of books at this point? That's infinitely inconceivable even to imagine that you would find the best books by a random chance. So you need something to filter through it. And I think the concept of great books is that filter. The grapes are an excellent example of the vicious, self-reinforcing hermeneutic circle between history, literature, and our collective historical awareness. Steinbeck reported what he saw. We accept it as a version of reality, and eventually it becomes a version of our collective historical reality. The question is, how long before Steinbeck's view of that particular historical period becomes the version of events, simply because we become too distant from the actual historical events and gradually rely on convincingly written pieces of historical fiction to inform our historical awareness? The idea that strikes me the most that the book is trying to put forward is that anybody who works for money is inherently evil, right? That any vendor of anything is going to try to rip you off and destroy your life.
I work for money.
Right. Well,
do you work for money?
Of course, we all do. But the thing is, what I want to say about that is that it's not their fault. Yeah, that's also another interesting thing, right? They work for money, and the money itself, the earning process, the system pushes them to do that. They don't want to rip you off, but they have to, because that's how the system works, right? So you can sort of backtrack this, right? If somebody tells you, capitalism leads to poor farmers being, pushed out of their house and dying on the roads and so on, you can trace that back to the original idea that people who work for money are going to rip you off, and they have no other choice than do that. And then you can analyze that idea and think, well, but I work for money, and I don't rip everybody off, and everybody works for money, and we don't necessarily have to rip everybody off, And so then it just all unravels like that, and you get to take that emotion, that experience of pity and sort of empathy for people in this bad situation, and dissociate that from what the book is trying to tell you will happen. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a great value in that. It's dangerous to give it to someone who has no idea, who is going to read this naively as history, right? And that was the point of my article. This pretends to be history. Steinbeck did live in the region. He talked to the people. He witnessed this migration, but he only witnessed it at the end. Right? He saw the camps. He saw how people were treating these people. He saw how they couldn't find work and how there was price gouging and they were trying to really push the prices down. Normal market forces. And then he just invented the backstory. Right? He just reasoned back to a false premise. If enough time passes, we forget what the real history was. We stop looking, and it's written quite convincingly. It's quite the plight, and it's rational. And then we just forget what the reality is, and we start believing this. And then somebody teaches that at school. If you want to get a good picture of what the 30s looked like, read Grapes of Wrath.
I was happy that we could.
I was happy that it ended.
I was happy that we could start because we're really ambitious with this project, right? We think that we're going to read 1,000 books in 163 years. And
yeah, well, we calculate at the speed we were reading it, the 1,000 books would come to 166 years. We have since.
So we have this very ambitious project, right? 1,000 greatest books, and you think that every single book is going to be this transformative experience, because a lot of those classics, like when you look up the reviews for them, people are always like, this book changed my life. I'm who I am because of this book. But reading Grapes of Wrath, you really understand that those reviews are more of an exception, and those people are insane, or like there's something wrong with them. They're having those intense experiences because of a book. And that,
Because of that book.
because of that book. And that, like, really out of 1,000, very few of them are going to be enjoyable and transformative. A lot of them are going to be important culturally. And I think what we need to start doing is to think about books in, like you said, in a cultural context and in what it teaches generations of readers about some cultural context or some thoughts, rather than to look at it as a piece of art, because often it's going to be bad.
Yeah, because you define a piece of art as something transformative in that way.
Yes.
To be specific. Right. Well, yeah, I think that's right. But one thing I'd like to add is that perhaps out of the 1,000 that we read through, we will filter out only a few to put on our best book list, in fact, because maybe that's what we are really looking for. Finding out how many of these classics are actually best, how many are actually worth doing it. Because so far, out of the things we have read and they are coming up, it's not that many. We'll see. Maybe it turns out that the real classics are elsewhere.
That's it.